Surely here with Sirius Tellus Moon Venus Hour Venus Day. And the sky is beautiful except that the ruler of the moon is 22ing in the 8th house. And the ascendant is 11 degrees. So, first of all, I want to give a big shout out, and this is to um, Ali Make Forever. And she's talking about MK Ultra and the rebranding of research in MK Ultra. So I was studying in Ben Gurion University of the Negev in two departments. One of them, one of the people, I was somehow requested to be a TA in that course, and the secretary told me that the person wanted me there. The person told me that the secretary wanted me there, and I was really surprised because it was a history of politics course. Um, Amazing course. The person was, and I didn't know that, intelligence. And then I noticed that they were behaving in really weird ways, um, as something that looked like trauma response. So when things came about, I said, well, I'm not continuing. Bless you. And I think I spent there 2 years. Okay, I said I'm not continuing for another year. Um, and the weird things that happen, I can only describe as uh, no touch mind control, but it wasn't like he was the mind mastermind, or so to speak. Seemed like it was activated by his own trauma. As I'm going through my second degree, I'm basically writing my thesis and my essays. One of them was about politics of the senses. My thesis was discussing the body-mind question um, in the medicines. I was looking from perspective of philosophy of science, but I was looking at consciousness, and as me saying, well, if consciousness has a marker in the physical, we should be able to trace it. And then adopting Larry Loudon, 1990s Larry Loudon, which discussed technology as the leading role in turning something from speculative or pseudoscience or innovative science to what we consider scientific. Um, all in all, I was also interested in the ability of astrology to predict mundane events. I did not even know what mundane astrology is. That person seemed to have been either already into those things or had their interest piqued, and there was something that was, um, how should I say that? There was some communication that I couldn't say if it was AI, if it was that person, or what is going on. And then I had to set boundaries to literally protect my sense of self. Now, as I begin to express myself, there were a lot of pressure on me to name something in a definition, and my understanding that there's something here that interferes with jurisdiction and that that person was acting out of trauma.
How to tell ADHD from.
So basically, there was something activating that person to
Welcome
try
to
to
Holistic
activate me
Awareness, the embodied
and thereby
rewrite
violate
method.
my sovereignty.
Please click the link below if you are interested
That was
in more
something that persisted for
experiences
10 long
about
years.
holistic
Not being
awareness.
having access to
Imagine trying
employment
to write a
that
beautiful
honors
new
my
chapter,
boundaries,
but your
housing,
pen keeps
having
getting
all of the
stuck,
circles around
forced
me
to retrace
somehow
old
targeted,
painful life.
not having therapy that actually works for me rather
A
than
program
target me
with
as an individual.
849
And my
subprojects,
therapist was
185
literally
researchers, 80
tortured.
institutions,
Now,
and
here is the
44
thing:
universities.
Mark Dutroux was also tortured. So it really opened a can of worms to the applied science of my thesis. And those things are under the guise of classified projects budget. And the researchers in academia that were not complying with that, basically I talked about the Epstein bar, where we couldn't do science, and science progressed by Italian strike. Okay, with Italian strike, at least has a raison d'etat, it's anti-slavery. But that was not, okay, but that was completely
There's 80
creating
institutions and
dysfunctional
44
science.
universities.
All of that
And as a
happened
side hobby, this is
happens in the decade
nation
before the
scale
Me Too,
infrastructure
where my
for
thesis proposal
behavioral
was
control.
abrupted
Universities,
um,
hospitals, prisons, foundations,
by
charities, the exact places
something
that
that
produce and
eventually
gatekeep
ventured into the
knowledge,
spread of the
regulate
pandemic.
pharmaceuticals, and have control over vulnerable.
Um, this is something that I love seeing discussed, because most people are not aware, not aware. Another shout out is, who's that person that talked about the fact that
Control over
every textbook that was ever published um, was basically by a company that was founded by Ghislaine Maxwell's father. And here is the thing: most of us are escape. My degrees were escape from the working sector that was slavery oriented, and I saw that I cannot do something useful. Don't laugh. Water expands upon cooling. Okay. I said what I said. Um, and this is where um, this is where I escaped to academia, and then I escaped to astrology, because at least there they talk about those things that were considered pseudoscience by the very cults that basically practice this to traffic people. Somebody has a confession. um, and anyway, so Mars is 22ing in Aquarius, squaring two Marses. Um, now, here is the thing that I want to talk about aside of this shout out, which is not unrelated. Apparently, the OK boomers that have been telling us all to get a job when we were in our aftermath of the subprime crisis, which people called it the Arab Spring, but there were a lot of demonstrations, are now finding out that they're not doing so well when it comes to retirement. And here's the thing: the only person that can relate to the only people that can really relate to giving a shot to working and not seeing it being worn out are the millennials. There is the sandwich generation. Um, okay, I think it's called Generation X, and that's the generation that began. That's a generation that began to establish prenuptials and divorces and anti-sexual harassment at workplace laws, and they were building the foundations for my generation to go to a workplace. Um, and then when that began to crumble, the generations that told us to get a job, which was also the generations that told us that the Me Too went too far, and then maybe tortured some people to say that as millennials. Um, but this is exactly the generation that now doesn't compile, and where the money went is what is basically raping very young children and the extortion money in the aftermath. And this is now, here's the thing, boomers, those that weren't grown in like downright cloning farms. Now, whenever we talk about cloning and how that affected fertility, it's always challenging because, hey, if people are already in a process of, let's say, childbirth and birthing and so on and so forth, they need to surround themselves with the best environment ever. And definitely not, I remember when we did like the Jaded Egg course, and or when people talk about orgasmic birthing, and it's not about shaming the people that didn't have orgasmic birthing. Okay, it's the other way around. It's basically acknowledging the fact that the world has been comprised in such a way that contributes to challenging birthing experiences because of the cloning farms. Now, when it comes to boomers, they were grown, and a lot of them idealized that because they spent time playing outside. Well, that was exactly the time where young Marc Dutroux was set out even as a child. He would be at 15 when he would meet basically a pedophile, which is more commonly known as the secret society's boy marriage. And his job would be to kidnap children. So of course the boomers that grew up to playing outside, where the parents would go to work and tell them, well, I don't know, dinner is at 5, and you give them pocket money. And I know that my mother was just the intermediate generation. She's Pluto's soul. And so she was making it a thing that she would not grow a keychain daughter. Um, and I was actually at school looking at the people that had a chain on their neck with the keys. And I'm like, hey, why don't I have such a cool chain? Because your mother is at home. You dumb fuck. But boomers did grow up with carabin keychain children, and there would be nobody to take care of them. Now, when children went missing, children went missing. Um, and that was the new about Marc Dutroux, because usually they would use something that a lot of the people that I went to as psychologists had to do, which is to break up families and take the children by the welfare. And so um, now, of course, the person whose job to do that is indoctrinated and brainwashed, so it's not like they're consciously knowing that this is what they're supposed to do. Um, and what we would have is a situation of people grew up to satellite parenting, and they got along, they had to get along well, and they wouldn't admit it if they don't, and they didn't really have anything to support them when they don't, and they're like, well, I made it. So when us millennials were, not really making it in the aftermath of the subprime decade, it was like, well, get a job. And so, and here's the thing, what are the people that did so-called make it? Human trafficking rings. You see, the students department, the head of the students department in any university, do you think is not an Epstein? being proud and smug. Now, so the boomers either made it in those ways, and or they were really trying to make it, and they tried to work and they tried, and then they end up in their 60s not really knowing. And now here's the thing, they didn't have parenting. That a lot of the generation of the women that said the Me Too went too far, they did not know. And this is how I would meet on the train an ex-military commander, I'm sorry, an ex-police department county commander with his missy and his child, and his child should be in her 20s or something, talking about him literally trying to purchase the trafficked 15 years old lady that said she needed to buy something in the supermarket, and ran away from him with his wife laughing, his child next to him. Then his child meets me and say, "Hey, how are you doing?" I'm like, "Remember me from the train with my parents that they were flying to there?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah." And I'm like, "Does she need help? Who am I going to call? The police?" I mean, and here is the thing. This is what came up when they grew with satellite parenting. So they weren't all day in their computers, but basically, for him, it's a stunt. His wife doesn't know better, and his child grew into that. And then all of the money went to extortion calls, which for them, they didn't ever understand what they were doing wrong. You can understand that those people, let's just say, think about the Mark Dutroux. At 15 years old, he met a pedophile. Probably there were many things more before that, yes, but at 15 years old, he meets a pedo. That would be his encounter with sexuality. So most of the money that was supposed to be our economy, the money that was supposed to be, when as a millennial, I loved screenwriting and so on and so forth, and I said, wait a second, while I develop my artistic capabilities, I don't want to just write screenwriting as a jobby job, compromising art or compromising my expression. Okay, then I'll go to work in a job. Now, for me, I found out that that job I couldn't do, and that job I couldn't do, and that job I couldn't do, and then that job was corrupt, and that job was corrupt, and that job was corrupt, and that boss was very weird, and it was corrupt and weird. And then I was like, okay, should I unalive myself? Because I was getting the most prestige jobs one could get without connections with parents and without a degree, and I was still not making ends meet. And I was even thinking, okay, well, let's talk about the business model. What, maybe try something with the business model. And of course, there was one company where I was working in, and one of the ladies told me, listen, he gambles. He gambles, and it goes to, which of course means sex trafficking, and it was intelligence. So the money, he can't pay me, not because I'm not competent. And he literally told me, I can't pay you not because you're not competent, but because I can't. I don't know if I can afford to pay that. And later the lady that worked there explained me why. That was amidst the subprime. The company was okay. But then that was that issue. And now I was so young there, and she told me he gambles. I didn't understand that gambles is goes to all these places. Then people set out companies, successful companies, but there is something leaking. And that thing leaking is being able to pay the employees. And so the employees cannot pay, whether it's rent or property tax. And at the same time, because we are growing, we understand that, wait a second, if the job is, how should I say, not compatible with the person, they will be incompetent employee. Now, meanwhile, in relationships, nobody is able to have good intimate life because either people are avoiding the people that are addicted to porn, or people addicted to porn dealing with the people that avoid them. But then it's not like they avoid, it's not like they are necessarily don't want sexuality or something like that. It's that, hey, sexuality is supposed to be pleasurable for both. Now, what do satellite children that grew up with be back at 5? And here's the thing, if they would cry or complain, their parents would feed them in this, take them to the street and say, okay, eat that food. Or say, oh, there it's even worse. Or the hungry children in Rwanda. I think Rwanda had the Rwanda shorts had the biggest backlash to the West because they were laughing at Westerner people for the hungry children in Rwanda. Americans don't even have food that's not filled with toxins. They come ruin the soil here and talk about the hungry children in Rwanda. But we all, even millennials, we grew up on the hungry children in Africa. And then the generation before us, my grandfather, my grandma, my mom, one time she opened the fridge and closed it to a Holocaust survivor. Never again. Now, we have an entire generation that doesn't get to retire, making it very obvious that the other generations don't get to retire either. But they don't even get to work in a way that is actually work, not slavery, and not abuse. And not only that, many of them can't say it. And many of them have boasted so much just when the generations were rebelling against the very things that matter to the retirement of the boomers. Because we were all living under the assumption that boomers somehow managed to make it. And today I saw the first bird that begins to write a vlog and talk about the fact that it's not actually so. Now, it's not their fault. They couldn't complain. But they also said that the Me Too went too far, that go get a job when we were actually fighting for our money to money. And that compounded to, them being full collision which makes it even more challenging to tackle these problems and these issues. So how do we even begin?